Now, across Texas, the issue is.
I'm Stephen Dial in Dallas.
I'm Rudy Koski in Austin.
I'm Greg Grugan in Houston, and this is Texas. The issue is.
It's a big topic and a big debate over school choice. After his State of the State, Governor Greg Abbott announced that he wants lawmakers to create education savings account, but it's not popular with everyone. We caught up with the governor after he spoke to the Arlington Chamber of Commerce. A big topic has been education savings accounts. How will this work?
Some people say, well, this is going to cause schools to shut down or something like that. That's very uninformed, because what we saw, we've seen more than 350,000 students leave public schools and go to charter schools, but we haven't seen public schools close down, and we certainly haven't seen any effect on high school football. These education savings accounts have proven to be very successful in other states, and I created one here in the state of Texas for special needs students that worked very well, so much so that the legislature wanted to expand it and to provide more funding for it.
The Dallas ISD superintendent, during your State of the State, tweeted saying, if this happens, private schools should be held to the same accountability and transparency. How can that happen? If they're private, they can't be held to a state standard, can they?
Well, they can be held to accountability standards. And the way that it would be structured, there would be a third party in charge of ensuring that accountability will be upheld. The state can impose accountability for any institution that receives this money. So yeah, accountability will apply.
In the past, when this subject has come up, of course, Democrats have opposed it in a majority setting, but some rural Republican lawmakers have also opposed it. What's different now?
Two things are different. One is we know for a fact that Republicans in particular, but really a majority of all Texans, support this, whether you're in urban, suburban, or rural areas, if you're black, white, or Hispanic, or Asian, or if you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. Majorities of all those categories strongly support it. More than 80% of Republicans support this, including in the rural areas. And so in rural areas, if a Republican representative votes against this, they're actually voting against their own constituents.
So you're very confident that this will not reduce funding for public schools?
For one, absolutely yes. But the way funding works for public schools is it provides funding for the students who go to those schools. And so those schools will continue to attract new students every single year, and their funding will remain in place. This does not harm public schools in rural areas or elsewhere. And as a result, there's no reason to have this fear raised about it, because we've seen that it can work very effectively.
Hot button topic, Rudy Koski. What do you think of that interview?
Well, let's go with my word. And I was consulting my old homeroom teacher, and she provided me a vocabulary worksheet. There's so many words here that we could pick from, right? You know, the governor said uninformed, that's a word. He also said accountability, that's a word. But the word that I'm choosing from my homeroom worksheet that my teacher gave me is entitlement.
Okay. Greg Grugan, I know you didn't bring any props. What's your word?
Stephen, I'm throwing the penalty flag on Koski, but my word is something everybody craves. Options. When you're in a bad place, options are something that you can really use.
Okay, well, I'm sure you guys will have a lot more words when the Fox Texas Trio comes back right after this break. Texas Governor Greg Abbott is prepared to take this show on the road, basically making his pitch to taxpayers about why he thinks education and savings accounts using public funds to allow parents to choose if they want to use public funds for private school for their students. Rudy Koski, Greg Grugan, back to talk to us. Greg, the governor says that this will not hurt public school funding. Is that factual?
Stephen, it's my understanding that funding for Texas public schools is largely based on average daily attendance. So when the governor says funding will not fall, he's referring to dollars dedicated to each individual student who chooses to attend public school. Now, if school choice is approved, I think it's safe to expect enrollment at a good many public schools will drop as parents take advantage of the voucher option and transfer their kids to private or parochial campuses in search of better results or a better fit. Others will choose to join the growing ranks of homeschoolers and essentially pay themselves to educate their kids. So will funding per public school student drop? Probably not. Will the total dollar figure flowing from the state to local public schools fall? I think it almost has to. How much depends on how many families exercise choice if the legislature grants it.
Now, the second governor, Greg Abbott, announced this in his State of the State. Some superintendents already had tweets ready to go. Of course, education groups have already been talking about it. I've seen some traction on social media. They're in Austin already in the legislature. Rudy, what are you hearing on the ground?
Yeah, what I'm hearing and also seeing are some really strong attacks. Matter of fact, there's not billboards, but posters that are posted up along some walls here in the Austin area of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick as a magician, and with the magician's hat, and saying, "Watch your public dollars, education dollars disappear." You know, these groups, they're really doubling down on the D. And the D's are diversion and defunding. Those are the words that they're using. Those are the buzzwords that I'm hearing here in regards to the voucher reboot. My word, entitlement, is because all sides in this fight, they believe that they are entitled to this money and no one else should have it. And that's, I think, the big rub in this is that whose money really is it? And the Republicans and Governor Greg Abbott will tell you it's the taxpayers' money. The educators will tell you it's the public schools' money, and that we are required to, by the Constitution and the U.S. Supreme Court, to provide a good, solid public education. So it's going to get down to how that word entitlement, I think, plays out, and that is going to be a really, really big word, and it's somewhat of a divisive word. There's another D in there. Steve?
Greg, I know that there has been some polling already done on this, and it appears to be a disconnect between what maybe a bipartisan group of parents think versus the lawmakers that they sent to Austin to make these decisions. What are the polls saying?
Look, Stephen, the governor is right when he says a majority of Texans favor school choice. Hot off the press polling from the University of Houston's Hobby School indicates 61% favor school choice, at least for low-income families. Now, here's the number that struck me. 73% of African-American Democrats favor vouchers for economically challenged students, and 68% support choice for all students, regardless of income. And then there's the clincher. The Hobby School survey found 62% of rural Texans support vouchers for every student in the state. And so when Governor Abbott claims urban black Democrats and rural Republicans in the legislature are defying a majority of their constituents by opposing choice, according to those numbers, he has a pretty solid point.
Rudy, in that interview, Governor Abbott basically called out rural Republican lawmakers by saying, if you don't vote for this, you're voting against the will of your constituents. Do you think that arm twisting will make a difference?
Well, Stephen, Greg makes a really good point in regards to the polls, and you can't ignore the polls, but you know how I feel about the polls, and it's all about the question, it's all about who gets surveyed. As to the governor, he certainly carries a very, very big stick in his threat, but you know, if the locals don't like it, and this is what it's going to get down to, if the locals don't like it in the rural areas, those rural lawmakers are going to listen to the locals. They're not going to listen to the governor and his big stick. They're going to kind of dodge it. It's going to be the home team that's going to play out here. They're going to be the key to the decision with the rural lawmakers. And those rural lawmakers, I think they are the key to this whole thing, because without them, I don't think the voucher gets through the House side. It's going to clear the Senate like it did in the last session. But the Republican group that supports this choice, this new fund, education fund, special fund, they're going to need the rural lawmakers, and if the locals don't support it, they're going to lose in the House.
Okay, that's all the time we have this Sunday. To see this episode, this interview with Governor Greg Abbott or any of our other ones, check out our station's YouTube pages.
And continue the conversation with us on social media.
And next week, the Democrat response. I go one-on-one with House Democrat Chairman Trey Martinez Fisher. And be sure to let us know what you think the issue is.